Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Group Reads panel about novels that are perfect for book clubs. My name is Andrienne Cruz from Azusa City Library in Azusa, California, and I will be your moderator. This panel features a variety of novels like coming of age, historical, imaginative retellings, and family dramas. I am so excited to welcome our five wonderful authors. First, we have Janelle Brown. She is an essayist and journalist based in Los Angeles. She is the author of What Kind of Paradise, which will be published by Random House on June 3rd. What Kind of Paradise is an atmospheric coming of age novel set in the 90s about a teenage girl named Jane living off grid in Montana with her activist father who commits a crime that compels her to figure out her own future. Next, we have Michelle Huneven, another SoCal resident. She is a journalist and author of Bug Hollow, which will be published by Penguin Press and it will be out June 17th. Bug Hollow is a character-driven literary novel that follows the lives of a California family through the decades, starting in the mid-1970s as they cope with the death of the eldest son who joined a commune in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Then we have Kyra Davis Lurie. She is a Los Angeles-based author and screenwriter. Her book, The Great Mann, will be published by Crown on June 10th. The Great Mann is an evocative historical fiction novel that reimagines the Great Gatsby during the 1940s in the West Adams Heights, a wealthy neighborhood of the Black elite in Los Angeles. Next, we have Jason Mott, based in Bolton, North Carolina. He is a poet and an award-winning novelist. People Like Us is his fifth novel and will be published by Dutton on August 5th. People Like Us is a stylistically complex literary novel that follows the lives of two Black authors, one on an international book tour, the other is preparing for a talk at a college to address gun violence. And last but not least, Lisa Smith is a writer and filmmaker based in South London. Jamaica Road is a debut novel, which will be published by Knopf on July 15th. Jamaica Road is a coming-of-age historical novel that explores the lives of Daphne and Connie, who meet at secondary school in South London. The book portrays Jamaican immigrant culture and racial tension in Thatcherite Britain. Okay, let's get started. I will ask each author a question in alphabetical order. So let's start with the inspiration for your books. For Janelle, what inspired you to write the story? Does it have a connection with what's going on with AI lately?
Yes and no. I mean, I've actually been thinking about this book for decades. I worked at Wired magazine and then Salon.com in the mid 90s. So I was working kind of in the dot-com boom. I was a technology writer and I was very much a booster of this kind of new internet and how it was going to change the world. And, I left to become a novelist. And over the years, over the decades, I've obviously watched as all these things we were predicting and so excited about in the 90s started to come to fruition. And I started to realize that maybe technology isn't the utopia that I imagined it was going to be. The age of technology has brought us a lot of major problems. It's kind of torn the world apart as much as it's also brought us all these new things. So I've been tussling with my own feelings about my own culpability, I guess you could say, about helping bring about this era that we're in now. And certainly with the kind of rise in AI, that started to kind of bring all these thoughts back and realize like we're kind of at the end game right now of what the promise of that era was. So I really wanted to write a book that would tackle those questions about technology and what it's done for us, but through a story that's not just about technology. It's really that's the sub story of a really coming of age story about a girl in the 90s and her father. But yeah, so that's the nuts and the bolts of where it came from. It's really been several decades in the making.
Thank you. Thank you. For Michelle, what inspired you to tackle the relationships of the Samuelsons, and why did you choose the 1970s as a starting point? Michelle? Okay, I can go back to Michelle again later. For Kira, What inspired you to tackle? Oh,
I'm here, sorry.
okay, great, 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 Michelle.
Um, After I finished my last novel, Search, I really didn't want to take on another big project. And so I decided I would write some short stories. The problem was I really didn't have very many ideas. So I thought about how I inspire my students at UCLA by giving them prompts. So I decided to go through a bunch of prompts. I put together all of them that I'd done, 126 that I'd given my students, and I started to go through them every day. And I came to one that was write a story about a sibling that you never had. And I realized that I'd written to that prompt, that I'd liked it so much, I'd written to it, and I'd had this old story drifting around on my desktop for about 5 years. It was called Bug Hollow, and it was about a fictional brother that I never had named Ellis, who graduates from high school and takes a camping trip with some friends and never comes back. Well, after I finished that story, I gave it to a friend of mine, the novelist Mona Simpson, to read. And she said, well, now I want to know what happened to Ellis's girlfriend. Ellis disappears because he finds a girlfriend. So I wrote that story. And when I finished that, Mona said, well, now I want to know about the mother. So it was really, it's a book based on prompts. Another friend of mine said, after I told her that the father of this family I seemed to be writing about sometimes worked in Saudi Arabia. This is the novelist Lily Tuck. And she said, well, he should have an affair in Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, no, he's a kind, um, family man. He's the least likely person to have an affair. And also, I know absolutely nothing about Saudi Arabia. But 6 weeks later, I had a draft of the story, which is called Freshwater in the Sea. So the book is really inspired by prompts, by people being curious about my characters and me satisfying their curiosity.
Thank you. For Kyra, what inspired you to tackle this retelling of The Great Gatsby?
Well, it started when I heard a story on my public radio station, KCRW. Shout out to public radio. And they were talking about the history of this neighborhood here in Los Angeles, West Adam Heights. And they were talking about how in the 1940s it had become a predominantly African American neighborhood because West Elm Heights was our Beverly Hills before we had a Beverly Hills. And then the 29 crash came, everybody lost everything, maintaining their mansions became a challenge. So they had to sell. And the very few people that had the money to actually buy were the newly wealthy African Americans, and they were willing to pay a premium. So you're talking about um, black, newly black business moguls, hoteliers, and of course the Black Hollywood elite. And they were talking about how Hattie McDaniel would have these gala events where everyone from Bing Crosby, Lena Horne, Clark Gable, Ethel Waters, they were all there. Duke Ellington was her entertainment. And I thought, well, that's extraordinarily Gatsby-esque, except it's real and it's Black. And it's a part of our history that we don't know. And that's sort of been a journey I've been on the last 15 plus years of realizing, although God knows, I have a college degree and it was in humanities, how much Black history I still didn't know. That was just not taught to me. And so I've just been on this journey, and here was this tangible evidence of something that was not shared with the world. And while I loved the two shows, Lovecraft County, I love The Watchmen, but because I've seen those two shows, I have seen Black Wall Street destroyed twice, but I've never seen what was destroyed. And I wanted, there's nothing poignant about being kicked out of Eden if you don't know what Eden is. And so I wanted to set something in our Eden and really explore that and use a very familiar, accessible story to elevate a little known part of history and make that accessible too.
Thank you. For Jason, how does the author character in this book, your new book, relate to the main protagonist in your National Book Award-winning book, Hell of a Book?
So in Hell of a Book, I've got essentially has two protagonists, and the author is this character who is traveling around touring, just kind of living like the stereotypical wacky author life is kind of how I like to describe it, where he's doing all the things that we think bad authors kind of get into. And while he's doing that, there is police shootings, there's this violence that's happening in the background. He's very much detached from it and trying to avoid it. And as the story goes on, he begins engaging in it in Hell of a Book. And then the secondary protagonist in that story is a young boy from Southeastern North Carolina who's around 10 years old. And it follows his journey as he kind of comes of age in the reality of what America can be for minorities in terms of like police shootings, just interactions with police in general. So as it goes forward, the two stories kind of start to intertwine and intermingle. And particularly for Hell of a Book, like a lot of people by the end of it, they often wonder like these characters are somehow connected. And there's a lot of questions about that, which I like to leave up to the readers as far as like what the answers are to some of those questions. But it's very much an attempt to explore a very familiar lens through two very unfamiliar voices. So hopefully that's what people are kind of engaged with and enjoying.
Wonderful, thank you. For Lisa, what inspired you to reference the 1981 Brixton riots in your storyline?
I guess it'd be hard to write a novel about South London in the 80s and to not reference the Brixton riots. It was such a significant event, and I guess made more significant by the fact that at the time in Britain there were only 3 television channels. So it was something that was very, very local that then became national. People were wondering what all this was about, what started it. And, there were 2 camps. There were people who saw what was happening in Brixton and were just like, oh my God, look at those Black people. It's just lawlessness. It's just reckless. It is a riot. And there were some people who saw it as an uprising. And I mean, I was only 10 at the time. So I didn't quite understand the build-up or the reasons behind it. But what I did clock, what I was aware of, was the different reactions, just in my own family, like my uncles, my aunts, my mum, my grandparents. They had a different reaction to my big sister and her friends, and my cousins and their friends. And there's a difference between the Windrush generation and the second generation. The Windrush generation are the people who, the migrants who came over from the Caribbean in the 1950s and 60s as part of the reconstruction of post-war Britain. And they were invited over and they were proud to come. They were like, yes, we're going to go to the motherland and help rebuild the motherland. And when they got here, they found they weren't necessarily universally welcomed, but nevertheless, they stayed, they endured. And it's that typical immigrant dream. They kind of thought, we'll come here, we'll be good immigrants. I mean, we have children, they'll be good British citizens. And you want better for your better for your children. But the second generation simply were not thriving. I mean, what we now know of the education system was there was systemic racism in that. And Britain in the 70s was in recession. There was mass unemployment. And you had a very, very vocal right wing saying the reason for the unemployment is there's immigration. And the reason for the high crime is immigration. And the government of the time, the Thatcher government, kind of lent into that rhetoric. And I suppose, they were very tough on crime. They were very, they were very, very hard on immigration, both legal and illegal. But with regards to the crime, they kind of resurrected this Victorian anti-vagrancy law, which basically meant that people could be arrested purely on suspicion. And it was that sus law that basically meant the police were arresting young Black people with impunity, and the simmering tension just basically boiled over into the uprising that kind of spread across the country.
Thank you for your answer. Okay, so we're gonna ask Janelle. So your book, Activist Father, he published like a kind of manifesto. What is your opinion on fringe ideas being debated in public squares?
Unmute myself. Sorry about that, guys. So a little background about the book for those who haven't read it yet, which probably is most of you. It's the story of a girl who's being raised in the woods in Montana by her father in this very off the grid kind of scenario. And her father is this brilliant, didactic kind of prophet type figure who started a magazine, a zine that he distributes to readers that's full of his ideas that are full of anti-technology screeds, anti-government. He's kind of got these fringe ideas, which, if you know who the Unabomber is, there are things that I have borrowed from some of his manifesto. So anyway, she's growing up in this environment with this father, and she's never really known anything but him. And part of the story is about her coming to terms with her coming of age and her realizing that her father has been feeding her this world, and it is not the entire world. And she learns that, in fact, he's been lying to her quite a bit about who she really is. And she ends up going on this journey to try and find her mother, and there's a crime involved, and she gets roped into. So, but yeah, what fringe ideas? Look, this is a really critical point that we are in right now, where technology and the internet have amplified fringe ideas and have made them mainstream, much to the detriment of modern politics and culture. And so I think it's one of the most important questions to be talking about right now is, what do we do? What has free speech done to us? And, I'm a firm believer in free speech. Obviously, I think it's one of the tenets of democracy. But we are also in this world where algorithms amplify these kind of lunatic fringe ideas and normalize them. And that is a real problem. We can see the outcome of that in this election. And I wanted to tackle that question in this book because I think it's such a talker. It's such a thing that we all should be discussing right now and really think about. And I don't know that I have a solution. I don't think we should be clamping down on free speech, but I also think we should be looking at how algorithms and the platforms that exist out there for free speech are promoting voices that are lying to us or are filling our children's brains with crackpot notions. I mean, the Andrew Tate of it all is really kind of horrifying. But yeah, so that's really what I wanted to tackle with this book. And I wish I had the answer. I don't, but it's something I think we all need to be talking about.
Thank you. For Michelle, so this book is about the Samuelsons. So why did you decide to include the story of Mrs. Wright, the principal of the school where Sib, the mom, worked?
Yes, she does seem to be a rather tangential character. However, she was a great mentor to Sib, the mom, Sybil, and also her boss at the elementary school. Mrs. Wright is a very patrician, tall, slightly mannish, very strict, formidable woman who decides that Sybil Samuelson is her project and takes her on and demands that Sybil bring her 2 daughters to tea every Saturday afternoon. And long after Sybil dies, Sybil's daughter, Sally, takes up the same thing with her own 2 daughters. And she goes to Mrs. Wright writes for tea every Saturday. And she also, well, she does everything that Mrs. Wright tells her to do, including to take on her Jamaican gardener, Fitz, who needs more customers. So Sally becomes involved in the life of Mrs. Wright and brings her children as a way of reconnecting with her mother's past, because Mrs. Wright tells these grandchildren stories about this very clever mother, that clever grandmother that they never knew. So it's a very tangential, oblique way into revealing Sally as an adult and as a mother herself, and bringing the book forward into the next generation, while also telling the love affair that Mrs. Wright has in her 80s, where she has the gardener's mother, Linda, comes to help her sometimes, and Linda is from Jamaica and has overstayed her visa and says she wants to get married so she can maybe stay in the country. And Mrs. Wright eventually says, well, I can marry you. And then she realizes how seriously she does indeed love Linda. So it's the story of this late in life love affair between Linda and Mrs. Wright, as observed and told from the point of view of Sally.
That's wonderful. For Kyra, please share your thoughts about consumption and the society we live in, as I quote a few striking passages from your book. So one of them is, satisfaction and in and of itself is somehow un-American, and they never love what they have as much as what they want. Can you tell us your thoughts about these passages?
Yeah. America, by our very nature, we are designed to be a country of strivers. We're supposed to want more. When a young couple buys a home, it's called a starter home. No one assumes that that's going to be the house that you stay in. Like, it's like, oh, it's only got 2 baths and 3 bedrooms, and you're going to need something bigger if you have kids, even though if you look all over the world, people have kids and have 1 bathroom and 2 bedrooms, like, or 1. And it's like, but in America, you're always supposed to want more. It's really very an American premise that I think we have successfully exported, that we all are supposed to do better than our parents. And if you think about it, we have had centuries, millennium of people who grew up with the idea that they were supposed to do exactly as well as their parents, but we are all supposed to want more. And it's written into our Declaration of Independence, which I think is a beautiful document. We have the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I really believe in having the right to pursue happiness. But I do think that we have defaulted in prioritizing the happiness that we're pursuing over the happiness that we have. And I also, in this book in particular, I also think that pursuit, while it can be problematic, it also can be extraordinarily empowering and important, because after all, it's like, as my protagonist's name is Charlie, and he comes from a family of sharecroppers, and his mother once said to him, don't ever let them catch you reaching for what they don't want you to have. And then he comes to this world in Los Angeles, and it's, and Terrence, who is not, he's my Tom, but he's not really a villain. He's a very complicated guy. He's like, I'm never going to settle for what I'm supposed to have. And while Terrence can be a problem, in that point, he's right in a lot of sense, in a major sense, at least in a lot of his actions. So there is power in saying, I'm not settling, I'm still reaching. And yet, on the other hand, that is often taken to extremes in this country by every race, that isn't so great, particularly when it's done on such an individualistic manner, where you're not trying to uplift a community or a society, but it's totally focused on yourself. Am I doing better than my parents? What more can I have? And I am as susceptible to it as everybody else. I mean, you make a bestseller list and then you're like, okay, so now the goal has to be kind of make #1 on the bestseller list, right? It's like you always are supposed to want more. If you're not wanting more, it's like somehow you're doing something wrong according to the American psyche. So, and this book is very much rooted in that portion of the American psyche.
Thank you. For Jason, why did you include a scene where the author was asked, "Do you love America?" Were you yourself asked this question in your book tours?
Yeah, so that is why the scene is there. So the new book, People Like Us, which comes out in August, it is a continuation of Hell of a Book, where the author in question is touring around Europe. He's just won the National Book Award. He's on tour. He's encountering a lot of things outside of America. To speak to Kyra's point, like he is kind of touching the psyche outside of America, and like how the non-American psyche is kind of what he's running into, and he's finding that to be very different. And so when I was touring for Hell of a Book in France and Italy last year in particular, I found the readers to be very, very insightful. Like they asked really unique, challenging questions. But one question that I did run into a lot that was very much a recurring question was like, "Do you love America?" And I realized that this wasn't just a question I had been asked by Europeans. It is a question I am asked by fellow Americans every day, pretty much, where it's like, because I live in the South, and there's a lot of flags, of varying types, and a lot of pro America everything. And I realize that I am very much, I think all of us are very much subconsciously asked every day, like, "Do you love America?" And it comes in different ways, but traveling through Europe was the first time I was ever directly asked the question, and I realized that there was a lot of unpacking that needed to be done with that, and a lot of unpacking that I myself was also still trying to do. So that's how the question kind of became one of the focal points. One of the many focal points of People Like Us is this exploration of what does it even mean to actually love America, and what does that look like, particularly for Black residents, but not only for Black residents. One of the themes of People Like Us is a discussion of like not police violence as the first book was, but this is a discussion of gun violence and how that in and of itself has bled into every facet of American identity. So being asked, "Do you love a country that kind of allows a lot of the harm to adults and to children?" That becomes really, really challenging. So that's kind of where that question came from.
Thank you. For Lisa, with what's happening in the UK now, what do you think of the temperature change addressing racism?
Gosh. Well, Jamaica Road is set in the 1980s and the early 90s, and that was a time of high racial tension, lots of multiculturalism and class division, the rise of populism. And while there has been significant changes since then in terms of race and more acceptance of multicultural societies, I don't know. I mean, there is a wider understanding of institutional racism across society now, and it's not just by people of colour who understand the concept of institutional racism. But, that progress is fragile and it's always under attack. And at the moment, we have right-wing populists in the ascendancy, and they're once more fostering division and telling people that, the reason why the cost of living is so high, or there's a long NHS waiting list, is because of asylum seekers or immigrants or Muslims, or the fact that your council, your local council, is wasting money on promoting diversity you know, taxpayers' money going on, you know, schemes to get more Black people around, you know, just that kind of thing. And I must admit, it's pretty depressing. You know, in the 80s, they called it, you know, loony leftism. Whereas now, you know, nowadays, anything that is seen as progressive or just even morally decent is called woke, and like, oh, we don't want that, so kind of thing. So it is depressing in a sense. I mean, but I think, you know, the fact of the matter is, we would have been foolish to kind of think that racists and people with that power were just going to surrender and wander off into the night. You know, they want to hold on to that power, and yeah, I just think all we can do as people who don't feel that way is to keep challenging those lies. I mean, I think one of the things that surprised me actually when I was writing was a character called Mark Barrett, who is a white boy who comes from a racist family. And I just expected him, when I first wrote him, just enter, say some racist things, and exit stage right, and we'll never see him again. But, you know, it's that thing that happens when you write sometimes. The characters just hang about and linger, and you kind of want to do more with them. And so, you know, what I find interesting about him is that I started drawing on my own experience of people like him, people who went to school with Black people, or who worked with Black people, or who lived near Black people, who were white and working class and being told these are your enemies, but didn't necessarily buy into it. And so I think we are the majority, they are the majority. There are people who don't believe those lies, and we all just have to keep trying to challenge those lies together.
Beautiful. Okay, this question is for everyone, starting with Janelle. What is your opinion about activism versus inspiration that pulses through the veins of books?
Oh, okay. That's a big question. I mean, look, I think my kind of holy grail of a book, and the books that I try to write myself, is a book where you are utterly gripped by a story and by the characters, and you are wrapped up in, you know, the, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? How are these two people going to mend their relationship? Are they going to figure things out? How are they going to solve this problem? And that, but the spine, like I think the clothesline that all this is hanging on is a theme. It's an idea. Like, you know, a subject that I as an author, or I as a reader, think is a really important thorny one that we really as a society need to be tussling with. And so my kind of goal as an author is to write that question, that big act, you know, you can call it activism, you can call it a subject that you think that we really should be discussing as a society, is what I kind of think of it as. Wrap that kind of inside the story. It's almost like you eat the chocolate and you get to the middle and you discover there's a nut there that you're like, oh, here's this nut that I really need to like chew on and think about now. So that's what I try and do all my books as. And, you know, I don't particularly get excited by a book that doesn't have any big picture ideas inside them. You know, sure, it's like a cotton candy and you eat it and then you feel kind of empty afterwards. So I like to try and write books where you're left chewing on something afterwards. You're really thinking about a subject. And I think that's really important. As authors, like, we have this platform, we need to use it to talk about the issues that are really important to us as a society these days. So that's what I try to do, but I also try to make it fun at the same time, a fun read.
So I'll just do this follow-up question. I guess this will also apply to everyone, but do you think the world today can still be inspired with a feel-good book?
Well, look, let's look what's happening with readership right now. I mean, there's a reason that romantasy is so wildly popular. Is people really want to have a break from thinking about the big issues, right? I mean, you turn on the news and you immediately want to go climb in a hole. So yeah, so people are picking up books about dragon riders and fairies and things like that. But I think that there's, you know, I think that we want books that make us maybe feel, good, but also think about things and feel satisfied at the same time. I mean, like, that's what I'd like to think that readers want. I mean, I think that, yes, obviously there's a lot of interest in romance and fantasy and things like that right now, but I also think books that just give people a little bit of escape but also giving them a sense of satisfaction that they're still working towards thinking about the bigger picture of our life without necessarily being hit on the head with a hammer, if that makes sense.
Thank you. How about you, Michelle? What is your opinion about activism versus inspiration? And then, can books today still inspire change with a feel-good book? I mean, with a feel-good storyline. I'm very curious about like what you guys think of this, so that's why I'm asking the question. Michelle, I
Sorry,
think you're
I
muted.
seem to be the problematical technological person here, but I actually do know how to use Zoom. However, my feeling is that the great service of literature is empathy, is to promote understanding between people that you otherwise might not have anything to do with, which is why, you know, I had so much fun reading both The Great Mann and Jamaica Road. So I believe perhaps in a quieter form of activism in creating characters that you learn to love and empathize with and understand more about where they're coming from. I think that I agree completely with Janelle that literary pleasure is not something that should be discouraged or unappreciated. It's why most of us read. We want to be swept away into books. We want to learn about people that we don't know about. Uh, when I think about writing and my heroes, I think about somebody like Catherine Mansfield, who writes about upper middle class life in New Zealand and England, and then tears the scrim of that to show that being alive can be a terrifying, heartbreaking proposition. So I'm always aware of I think the deeper questions, the more spiritual questions. In my last novel, Search, it's probably my most activist novel because it's a novel about how well-meaning, educated, intelligent people often make the wrong decisions for their community. But in my present novel, Bug Hollow, I would say that there's probably no activism, but a lot of empathy among the different characters. So what was the second question again, please?
Oh, do you think feel-good books still have a place in society right now to inspire change?
Uh, I think so. I'm wondering, I agree that to me it's a little interesting and a little troubling how popular horror and romantasy and you know, romances and things like that are taking over even, you know, like the book review and things, because I think that there are serious questions that life needs to address, that fiction needs to address. So but I do think that we read for literary pleasure and we read for empathy, and that if there's activism in there, if there's a way of enlightening and inspiring the human spirit, then sure, I'm all for it.
Kyra, would you care to answer the question as well?
Yeah, so I don't expect to inspire activism in my work. If that said, if that happens, wonderful. One of the things I think that's so great about a book, or unique about a book, different than, say, having experience in a movie theater, is that it is such a personal relationship between the reader and that book. each person is going to pull out something different. And so there will be, sometimes people will recite a line from an older book I read, and like that line really opened my eyes, and I really wanted to, like, and it really inspired me to do A, B, C, and D. And I don't remember the line, okay? And but for that person, it really resonated, and it inspired them to something so wonderful. For me, the activism within the book, from my activism, is that we live in a time where people are trying to actively erase our history. And look, I don't know how to get immigrants out of an El Salvadorian prison. I don't know how to save Medicare. But I do know how to elevate history. I know how to elevate our history. I know how to shine a light on that. That's my personal activism. What it inspires in a reader, I don't know, but I can shine that light. And in terms of, can a fun book inspire activism? Honestly, I think a book that you read for pleasure is probably the only book that will inspire activism. If you're reading a book that is about a specific subject, about racism or about income inequality, chances are you're already an activist. You're just reading to get more information on that. If you're reading a book for entertainment and you stumble across an idea that you haven't been obsessing about or working towards, that's where the inspiration comes. The other is building, and that's important. I am not in any ways, shape, or form disparaging those books that are about those subjects, but they're not going to be read by someone who isn't already inspired. So again, it will happen on an individual level, and I don't think that as authors we can fully anticipate or predict what that's going to be or what that's going to look like. But I do believe that it happens and that it's there and that it is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Jason, what is your opinion about this? And do you think a feel-good book still has a place to inspire change?
So as far as the inspiration and activism question, I think that I agree very much with Kyra, and I think I'll probably just want to rephrasing basically what she said in my own whatever less eloquent way. But yeah, I think it's really difficult to actively inspire people in the way that we think to. I think inspiration comes in very roundabout ways. I think that I have been inspired by books and movies that people probably listed under the fun fluff side of things. I think one of the dangers that we make from the creative side, from the artistic side, is we too often view and perceive readers as purely passive recipients. We forget that readers engage in their own definitive ways that are far different than we ever imagined. And so oftentimes there's this idea that, like, in order to make readers become more active and like help produce change, we need to like hit them over the head with these strong messages because they won't hear it otherwise. And in my experiences, the reality has been that they hear the subtler messages in the fun reading or in the fun moments more often than they do in the more serious things. Um, and I, because usually when they come across it in the fun books, they're able to find it on their own terms. They're not being told so directly. They're able to come across it in their own terms, and they become more they feel more active in this learning experience that they're having. So as for me, like, I think you can probably figure out, like, yeah, I'm a huge believer that fun books serve a purpose. They always have and they always will. I am someone who very much reads. I read way more fun books and watch more fun movies than I do the serious stuff, because I am someone who I have trouble turning off the seriousness of the world. It is a known issue with me. And so the balm for that is I need to engage in fun things. Even when I'm watching the funnest, silliest, goofiest thing, there's an undercurrent of seriousness that I will never be able to turn off. And I think that is true of more people than we give credit for. And so at the end of the day, I still come back to trying to have a message, trying to have something important, trying to say something meaningful. And I think we need to remember that, like, fun serves a purpose from an evolutionary standpoint. It helps us relieve steam and stress. It helps us reset mentally. Fun exists for a reason. And I think we need to remember that. And the activists will never go away. Fun leads to creativity. Creativity leads to art. Art leads to activism. It's the unbroken chain, I think.
Thank you so much for that answer, Jason. Lisa, what is your opinion about
Well,
and
I
feel
kind
good
of
if
just,
there's still a space for feel good books nowadays?
well, I kind of agree with what everyone else has already said. You know, it's so important to, you know, have fun when you're reading. You know, why would you want to read if you're not actually having fun? If it's a chore and you just feel like you're being reached at, I mean, it's just like, why would you do that? You know, it's really important. I mean, activism can also be fun. I mean, it's, when I set out, I mean, when I first started writing Jamaica Row, I mean, what was really important to me, I guess, was character. And I wanted characters that I was interested in, and then would just allow them to evolve and do what they do and say what they say, rather than thinking I needed to put speeches in their mouths, because that's what I like as a reader. I'm interested in people and interested in characters and what they'll do next. So I think I'm veering it off from the question, but I believe that books, feel good books, can inspire change. They can inspire activism. I think writing and also films, you know, can be a soft power, really.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so I guess I'll just keep asking. What is one question that, um, well, we'll just, use up the time, but what question do you want your readers to ask each other in their book groups? Do you have like a particular topic that you want to, or, question? Let's start with Janelle.
I think I want people to ask themselves, how has technology changed our society, and in what ways has that been good, and what ways has that been bad? If we can't put the genie back in the bottle, what can we do to make sure we're managing the direction that our society is heading because of all these changes that have come our way?
Thank
I'll
you.
keep it
I
short
guess
because I know we only have a few minutes for
I
everybody.
know we have 2 minutes, so if you guys can just shout your question. Michelle, please.
Well, one of the things I've realized about Bug Hollow so far is that everybody sees something very different in it as to who the main character is. It's about a family, but who is the heart of the novel? And to me, it's very revealing that some people say that the difficult mother is the heart. I personally believe that Sally Samuelson, who starts out as the 8-year-old narrating the first story, is the heart. So it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. So I think that that would be a really interesting, and I've learned a lot about which friends see what. I've gained insight into my friends from how they've picked the character. So I think that that would be a good question for a book group. You'd learn a lot about the different members.
Thank you. We have maybe Kyra to answer the question.
I will, it's odd as a Black author talking about Black history, to quote Faulkner, but the past is never dead. It's not even past. And so I would ask readers to think about how the things in this book relate to today and how it's not past.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to Jason and Lisa, but thank you to all the librarians for joining us today. Next, we have two concurrent panels, The Magic of Love and Personal Stories. And to our fabulous authors, it was a pleasure to spend time with you all. To our awesome attendees, have a wonderful webinar and happy reading.